Today I'm building Ahsoka's lightsabers from Star Wars The Clone Wars. For this build, I used craft foam, bevel foam, dowel foam, cat toy foam, coffee foam, putty, super glue, a wooden dowel, reflective tape, clear packing tape, paint, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I like to do these lightsaber builds a little bit differently each time, just so I'm not rehashing the same build. So today I'm going to start out with a length of bevel foam, the wider bevel foam, which you can get at most craft stores. You can also make it by cutting a dowel in half, but this is clearly sliced in half a little bit more evenly than I could cut it. First I cut 2 equal lengths of bevel foam, and then I carefully cut a notch out of one end of each of the length. This will create that tuning fork shape that Ahsoka's saber emitters have, reminiscent of Anakin's Graflex saber, like a double version of his, which I actually like because it's a nice tie-in. She's supposed to be training under Anakin. Presumably she built one of her lightsabers before being assigned to him, but I think it stands to reason that if she's of the same or a fairly close generation of Jedi to him, then her saber would be in a similar style, right? That's just my headcanon. I don't know. I like the continuity. Then I carved an alcove with a razor pen. This was an incredibly rough cut, so I smoothed it out with my rotary tool and a drum bit attachment. This has to be done very delicately because the rotary tool likes to go off in tangents, and I don't want to be forced to include battle damage on my prop. Yes, you're gonna weather this lightsaber whether you like it or not. No, rotary tool, don't do it! Once I finished sanding, I repeated all these steps on the other bevel length. The reason I'm using bevels instead of a dowel is because there's this heat sink in either side of Ahsoka's sabers. Not to mention the center of this has to be hollow for the blade to fit into. And it's just infinitely easier to make that by stacking bevels than by drilling out the center of a foam dowel when it's this long. I mean, have you ever tried to do that? It's like because the foam is flexible, you're never gonna get it straight down the center. I use super glue to attach these pieces for time and convenience. Contact cement's kind of overkill for a prop this small. I suppose you could use hot glue, but that gets tricky. Yeah, right here. So when the 2 pieces of the hilt grip were attached, I moved on to the pommel. I wrapped a triangular bevel around the end of the hilt, which would be super annoying to do with hot glue and contact cement. Always think about like what's gonna be the least annoying when you start your project. You'll have so much better of a time. I had to do this in stages so that it wouldn't pull itself apart. Also so that I wouldn't glue myself to my prop. After I closed it up, I added a stopper in the center to keep the end of the blade from ramming out the pommel, and then I added a spherical cat toy on top of that. These are actually made out of EVA foam and are coming in handy a surprising amount. The trench on either side isn't supposed to go all the way down to the pommel, so I added some scrap foam in there to fill it in. Then I wrapped a piece of 4mm foam all the way around. I like to slant the ends when I'm making cylinders out of 4mm foam, just because it gives more surface area for the glue and leads to a stronger attachment and a less noticeable seam. Wish I'd known that when I started out. You're welcome. Then I added more triangular bevel foam on top of that to turn that edge from a step into a slant. This was an offcut from an earlier build. I'm not sure which one, but I do save them just because, I mean, look, it's coming in handy right now. Next, I added square pieces of 2mm foam around the spherical pommel. These are actually reminiscent of Obi-Wan's saber, and there's 8 of them. For the buttons, I took a section of black foam dowel, sanded a curve into one end so that it would sit flush against the surface of the saber hilt, and then I cut that section from the dowel. The reason for sanding it first is because it's easier to hold on to this way, and sanding tools have a tendency to launch small foam pieces across the room. Doing some build, I think I was making a pommel of a Lord of the Rings sword and spending a stupid amount of time on it, and just as I was finishing up, it launched across the shop and into a pile of parts. So I had to make the whole thing again just because it would take less time than to remove all of those materials and the organizer itself to get to the thing. Didn't find it till I was moving. Cool story, bro. I'm trying to help people. Help me help you. I make the mistakes so that you don't have to. I stacked pieces of varying diameter on top of each other to make the groove that allows the saber to fit into the belt hook. Oh, I want to point out here that there's a company that actually sells these lightsaber belt hooks, like for real. So if you're following along to make an Ahsoka cosplay and you have the budget for it, then you might want to consider picking one of those up, just because they're going to be stronger than foam. The whole point of the foam is it bends, it's flexible, so it's less likely to get destroyed. But that flexibility works against it when you're making a belt hook, you know? So just think about what the prop is going to be used for when you're building it, and let that influence your decision to prevent future problems. I glued the buttons to the saber hilt. Actually, not buttons, clearly. Belt hook and a dial. One of them was trimmed from the end of a wide EVA foam dowel that was already painted flat black from some previous project. That was handy. Next, I made the actual emitter, which in this case is inset within those tuning fork cowling pieces. I made it out of more scrap foam circles. I cut the centers out of them with a leather hole punch. Once the stack was assembled, I glued it in. Then I worked on the flanges on the outside. They're made out of 4mm foam resting on 2mm rectangular platforms. Again, reminiscent of the rabbit ears on Anakin's saber. Then I made the box on the side of the hilt out of a scrap piece of 3/8" floor mat foam. I put a bit of a curve, a concavity, if you will, on the interior, and then super glued it on. Then I used a leather hole punch to drill holes in the sides of the hilt near the top of the buttons. They both went down to the core. I cut up the offcut and reused it for the inset details. I skewered toothpicks into them to simulate the electrical connectors. On an actual Graflex, this is where a wire would attach to it to power the flash. In fact, if you can find historical, real-world Graflexes out in the wild, that's usually how you find them. They're covered in these old, decaying wires and electrical tape, and are super gross, which is why the camera people were getting rid of them. But now that they know that the Star Wars fans think they're valuable, all of a sudden the camera people are mad at the Star Wars fans for destroying these things, and it's like, you know, you weren't mad when it was a gross pipe covered in electrical tape and battery acid. Oh, nerd fight, nerd war, everybody. Camera nerds versus Star Wars nerds. Begin. I inset it back into the hole that I drilled. For the other side, I used a button from my stock of lightsaber buttons. I filled in the cracks with some putty, which means it'll need 20 or 30 minutes to dry, so I'm just gonna have to try and avoid that while I work. Then I used my razor pen to add some seams back into the box on the side there. Those weren't very visible, so I heated them up with my heat gun in order to get them to open up a bit. I made the second shorter lightsaber pretty much exactly the same way as the first one, but without that wider section at the pommel and fewer details. It's just a less detailed version of the previous saber. Then I stuck both of the sabers into some scrap styrofoam to steady them as I painted them. To prep for paint, I give it a very quick blast of the heat gun. This seals up the surface of the EVA foam, making it less absorbent when I paint. First, I gave them a coat of flat black paint. This will allow me to see some of the problem areas once the first layer dries, which with flat black paint is pretty quickly. I did a spot touch-up of all those areas that were still white that I missed before. Then when that dried, I went over it again with gloss black acrylic house paint. I'll have to do several coats. When all the layers dried, I masked off the parts that I wanted to remain black and covered the whole thing with Rub and Buff metallic finish. This is not the shiniest metallic coating, but in the show, just the animation style, her lightsabers are practically gray, like battleship gray. So I'm okay with it. One thing that I like about Ahsoka's lightsabers is that the color of the blade changes depending on various factors, which I sort of view as a reflection of the personality of the wielder. Like, she starts off with one and it's green, then later the second one has just a slightly yellower tinge to it, which I thought was a nice touch because people change over time. And if it was, say, a year between building the first one and the second one, you know, there would be some growth and development in her personality and experience as a Jedi. Then when she leaves them with Anakin, presumably for years, over time, as they're in his care, like he mentions that he maintained them, the blades turned blue, which was a reflection of his personality. And then later on, when she builds new ones, those are white. So I do like that idea that the color's not going to change instantly if a different person is using them, but over time they will. I don't know, I like it. Lastly, I added a Kyber crystal, conveniently available in my Etsy store. I mean, potentially. Link below. Then for the blade, I found a dowel and I wrapped it with reflective safety tape. Because the adhesion on that tape isn't fantastic over a curved surface, I then wrapped it with clear packaging tape, which holds a lot better. I know that the LED blades are popular, but in photographs, those don't really look so good. It's the thing with camera flashes, they're designed to illuminate the shot as much as possible, which has the effect of canceling out the LED blades, which really only look good in low light. But reflective tape will throw nearly 100% of that flashbulb light straight back into the camera, actually causing what would be considered a lens flare, but it ends up looking like actual lightsabers. So that's what I've been doing. Hey, it was good enough for the original trilogy. Good enough for me. Con photographers hate me, but they can get in line. Also for fan films, if you're doing a post effect, it's 1,000 times easier to see a reflective blade than a painted wooden stunt blade. Speaking from experience. And there we go. And that's how to make Ahsoka's Clone Wars lightsabers. Hey everybody, thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, then you can show your support by hitting the like, subscribe, and bell icon to be notified of future uploads. If you're interested in supporting the channel, then you can check out the link in the description down below for patron channel services. Anything pledged goes towards improving the video quality, prop quality, and shop equipment, which allows me to produce higher quality content for you all to enjoy. Alright, happy crafting. See you later.